The morning sun cast long shadows across Windsor Castle as Prince William stood at his bedroom window, adjusting his military uniform for what would be one of the most difficult days of his life. Down the corridor, his younger brother Harry was going through the same ritual, yet the distance between them felt like an ocean rather than mere rooms. Philip Mountbatten, the Duke of Edinburgh, had passed away peacefully at the age of 99, leaving behind a legacy that spanned 7 decades of royal service. For the two princes, however, his death represented more than the loss of a beloved grandfather. It marked a moment when their fractured relationship would be put under the most intense public scrutiny the royal family had ever faced. William's hands trembled slightly as he fastened his medals. The weight of responsibility had always been heavy on his shoulders as the future king, but today felt different. He would have to navigate not only his grief, but also the delicate situation with Harry, who had returned to England for the first time since the explosive Oprah interview that had sent shockwaves through the monarchy. The interview, broadcast just weeks before Philip's death, had revealed allegations of racism within the royal family and claims that Harry's wife, Meghan, had been denied help during her mental health crisis. The accusations had created a rift so deep that many wondered if the brothers would ever speak again. The Duke of Edinburgh's wishes for his funeral had been clear and simple. He wanted no fuss, no state funeral, just a quiet ceremony with his family at St. George's Chapel. What he could not have anticipated was how his death would become the backdrop for one of the most watched family dramas in royal history. Palace officials had spent days planning the funeral logistics, with particular attention to the seating arrangements and processional order. Every detail mattered when the eyes of the world would be watching. The Queen, despite her grief at losing her husband of 73 years, had to approve arrangements that would minimize the potential for public displays of family discord. As the mourning progressed, both brothers prepared for their roles in the ceremony. William, as the second in line to the throne, carried the weight of institutional responsibility. His every action would be scrutinized, not just as a grandson mourning his grandfather, but as a future monarch setting an example during a time of crisis. Harry faced a different challenge. Having stepped back from royal duties and relocated to America, he was returning as both an insider and an outsider. His presence was necessary out of respect for his grandfather, but his changed status within the family created an awkward dynamic that would play out in front of a global audience. The funeral arrangements had been modified due to COVID-19 restrictions, limiting attendance to just 30 people. This intimate setting would make any tension between family members even more visible. There would be no crowds to hide behind, no state ceremony to provide distraction from personal dynamics. Queen Elizabeth II, at 94 years old, faced the dual challenge of saying goodbye to her husband while managing a family crisis that threatened the stability of the monarchy. Her Majesty had always maintained that family matters should remain private, but the circumstances surrounding Philip's funeral made privacy impossible. The media presence outside Windsor Castle was unprecedented. Cameras from around the world had gathered to capture what many were calling the most significant royal funeral since Princess Diana's death in 1997. The comparison was not lost on Harry and William, who had walked together behind their mother's coffin as children, united in grief. Now, as adults, they would once again walk together in a funeral procession, but the unity of their childhood had been replaced by a complex web of accusations, hurt feelings, and institutional pressures. The question on everyone's mind was whether this solemn occasion would provide an opportunity for healing or simply expose the depth of their estrangement. The palace had released a statement emphasizing that the focus should remain on celebrating the Duke of Edinburgh's life and supporting the Queen during her time of grief. However, the reality was that every aspect of the brothers' interaction would be analyzed, from their body language to their seating positions to any conversation they might have. As the hour of the funeral approached, both princes made their final preparations. William reviewed his responsibilities as a senior royal, while Harry reflected on his decision to speak publicly about his family's private matters. The weight of their choices, both past and present, would be on full display as they honored their grandfather's memory while navigating the aftermath of their public falling out. The morning of April 17th, 2021, dawned crisp and clear over Windsor Castle. Inside the ancient walls, the royal family began gathering for what would be remembered as one of the most emotionally charged ceremonies in recent royal history. The COVID-19 pandemic had transformed what might have been a grand state funeral into an intimate family affair, but the reduced scale only intensified the focus on the personal dynamics at play. Harry had spent a restless night in his childhood bedroom at Frogmore Cottage, the home he had once shared with Meghan before their departure from royal life. The familiar surroundings brought back memories of happier times with his brother, when they had stood side by side through numerous family occasions. Now, the silence between them spoke volumes about how much had changed. The funeral preparations had been meticulous, with every detail planned to honor Philip's military background and his decades of service to the crown. The Duke had served in the Royal Navy during World War II, and his funeral would reflect his naval career and his role as patron of numerous military organizations. The ceremony would be steeped in tradition, but it would also be deeply personal for a family saying goodbye to their patriarch. William arrived at Windsor Castle with Catherine and their children. Prince George and Princess Charlotte would not attend the funeral due to COVID restrictions, but their presence at the castle added a sense of family continuity. Catherine had become a stabilizing force within the royal family, often serving as a bridge between different family members during difficult times. The Queen had made the difficult decision to sit alone during the funeral service, following COVID protocols that required social distancing even among family members. The image of Her Majesty sitting solitary in the chapel would become one of the most poignant symbols of the pandemic's impact on even the most significant life events. Palace staff worked quietly to ensure that every aspect of the funeral would run smoothly. They were acutely aware that any misstep could become front-page news, particularly given the heightened interest in the royal family following Harry's revelations about life behind palace walls. The choreography of the day had been planned to minimize opportunities for awkward encounters while maintaining the dignity appropriate to the occasion. Harry's return to royal protocol felt both familiar and strange. The military uniform he wore carried memories of his service in Afghanistan and his pride in his military achievements. However, his changed status within the family meant that some of his honorary military titles had been stripped away, a painful reminder of the consequences of his decision to step back from royal duties. The Duke of Edinburgh's Land Rover, which he had helped design, would carry his coffin to St. George's Chapel. This personal touch reflected Philip's hands-on approach to royal duties and his practical nature. The sight of a modified Land Rover would serve as a fitting tribute to a man who had always preferred function over ceremony. As the funeral procession prepared to begin, the carefully planned arrangements placed Harry and William in positions that would require them to be in close proximity without forcing direct interaction. Palace officials had consulted with both brothers to ensure the arrangements would be respectful to their grandfather while acknowledging the current state of their relationship. The weight of history pressed down on both brothers as they prepared for the procession. They had walked behind another royal coffin before, when they were just boys grieving for their mother. The trauma of that day had bonded them for years, but now, as they face another loss, they would do so as estranged adults carrying their own emotional baggage. Catherine's role in the day's events would be crucial, but understated. As someone who had maintained relationships with both brothers and their wives, she understood the complexity of the family dynamics better than most. Her presence would provide William with emotional support, while potentially serving as a conduit for any communication between the brothers. The media assembled outside Windsor Castle represented news organizations from around the world, all eager to capture any signs of reconciliation or continued tension between Harry and William. The brothers' body language, their positioning during the ceremony, and any interaction they might have would be analyzed frame by experts and commentators. Queen Elizabeth II's strength during this period was remarkable to those who knew her well. At 94, she was not only dealing with the loss of her life partner, but also managing a family crisis that threatened to overshadow her husband's funeral. Her decision to maintain royal protocol while accommodating family sensitivities demonstrated her decades of experience in balancing public duty with private grief. The funeral service would be conducted by the Dean of Windsor, with prayers and readings chosen to reflect Philip's faith and his commitment to service. The ceremony would be broadcast live, allowing millions around the world to pay their respects to a man who had dedicated his life to supporting the Queen and serving the British people. As the final preparations were made, both Harry and William found themselves grappling with emotions that went beyond grief for their grandfather. They were mourning not just Philip's death, but also the breakdown of their own relationship. The irony was not lost on either of them that Philip, who had always valued family unity and duty above personal feelings, would be deeply saddened by their estrangement. The Duke of Edinburgh had been a steady presence in both princes' lives, offering guidance and support through their various challenges. His practical approach to problems and his military discipline had influenced both brothers, though they had interpreted his lessons differently as they carved out their own paths in life. The moment was fast approaching when Harry and William would have to put aside their personal differences and present themselves as united members of the royal family. Whether this public display of unity would translate into private reconciliation remained to be seen, but for the duration of the funeral, they would have to honor their grandfather's memory by maintaining the dignity and composure he had always exemplified. The moment had arrived. At precisely 2:45 p.m., the funeral procession began to form in the castle's quadrangle. The sight was both magnificent and heartbreaking as members of the royal family took their positions for the solemn walk to St. George's Chapel. The Duke of Edinburgh's coffin, draped in his personal standard and topped with his naval cap, sword, and a wreath of flowers chosen by the Queen, rested on the specially modified Land Rover. Prince Charles, the heir to the throne and eldest son of the deceased, walked directly behind the Land Rover, his face a mask of controlled grief. Behind him, the formation that the world had been waiting to see took shape. Palace officials had made a strategic decision that would become one of the most talked-about aspects of the funeral. Peter Phillips, the Queen's eldest grandson and son of Princess, and was positioned between Harry and William. The decision to place Peter between the brothers was diplomatic genius. It avoided the awkwardness of having Harry and William walk side by side, which could have appeared forced given their strained relationship, while also preventing them from being obviously separated in a way that would highlight their feud. Peter, who had maintained good relationships with both cousins, served as a natural buffer while the procession maintained its dignity. As the procession began its slow march across the castle grounds, millions of viewers around the world watched with intense fascination. The brothers' faces were studies in royal composure, each maintaining the stoic expression that had been ingrained in them since childhood. Yet those who knew them well could see the subtle signs of tension in William's slightly rigid posture and Harry's carefully controlled breathing. The 8-minute walk to the chapel felt much longer for everyone involved. Each step was measured, each movement choreographed to reflect the solemnity of the occasion. The only sounds were the steady rhythm of military boots on ancient stones and the distant tolling of the Sebastopol bell, which marked the passage of the procession. Harry's mind wandered during the walk, remembering the countless times he had made this same journey with his family for happier occasions. Christmas services, Easter celebrations, royal weddings, all had taken place in St. George's Chapel. Now he was walking this path for his grandfather's funeral, possibly for the last time as a working member of the royal family. William's thoughts were focused on the future as much as the past. As second in line to the throne, he understood that this funeral marked not just the end of Philip's era, but also a transition point for the monarchy. His grandfather had been the Queen's constant companion and advisor for over 7 decades. Without Philip's steady presence, the institution would have to adapt and evolve. The procession reached St. George's Chapel, and the carefully planned choreography continued as the family members took their seats. The seating arrangement had been the subject of intense planning, with COVID-19 social distancing requirements providing a convenient excuse for arrangements that might otherwise have appeared deliberately separative. The Queen sat alone in the front row, a solitary figure in black, her face partially obscured by a black mask that had become the unfortunate symbol of pandemic-era mourning. Across the aisle, Charles sat with Camilla, while other family members were distributed throughout the chapel according to the complex calculations that governed royal protocol. Harry found himself seated in the second row, several seats away from William, who sat with Catherine. The distance was appropriate given COVID restrictions, but it also served to minimize any potential for uncomfortable interactions during the service. Both brothers could focus on the ceremony without the distraction of managing their personal relationship in such a public setting. The service began with words that Philip himself had helped choose years earlier when planning his funeral arrangements. The Duke had been intimately involved in every aspect of the ceremony, from the music selections to the military honors. His practical nature and attention to detail were evident in every element of the service. As the Dean of Windsor spoke about Philip's life of service, both Harry and William found themselves reflecting on their grandfather's influence on their own lives. Philip had been a man of strong opinions who was never afraid to speak his mind, traits that both brothers had inherited to varying degrees. He had encouraged their military careers and supported their charitable endeavors, always emphasizing the importance of duty and service above personal desires. The funeral's most poignant moment came when the chapel fell silent, except for the sound of the Queen's quiet weeping. The sight of Britain's longest reigning monarch, who had always appeared invincible to her subjects, showing such human vulnerability in her grief, moved viewers around the world to tears. During the service, Harry caught a glimpse of William from across the chapel. For a brief moment, their eyes met, and, in that instant, both brothers seemed to remember not their recent conflicts, but their shared love for the man they were honoring. It was a fleeting connection, barely perceptible to the cameras, but significant for those who understood the depth of their estrangement. The Archbishop of Canterbury delivered a sermon that emphasized themes of reconciliation and forgiveness, words that seemed particularly relevant given the family dynamics at play. His message about the importance of unity and understanding resonated throughout the chapel, though whether it would have any lasting impact on the brothers' relationship remained to be seen. As the service continued, the weight of royal tradition pressed down on everyone present. This was not just a family saying goodbye to a beloved patriarch. It was the British monarchy conducting one of its most solemn rituals. The ceremony had to honor Philip's memory while maintaining the dignity and continuity that the crown represented. The music, carefully chosen by Philip years earlier, included pieces that reflected his German heritage and his British military service. The naval piping party's haunting melodies echoed through the chapel, creating an atmosphere of profound respect and sadness. The Duke's coffin remained the focal point of everyone's attention, a reminder that despite all the family drama surrounding the funeral, the day was ultimately about celebrating and mourning a remarkable life. As the service neared its conclusion, both brothers prepared themselves for the final phase of the ceremony. They would have to process out of the chapel and face the world's media once again, this time with the additional emotional weight of having just said goodbye to their grandfather. The question hanging in the air was whether this shared experience of grief would provide any foundation for healing their fractured relationship. As the final hymn echoed through St. George's Chapel, the weight of the moment settled over the assembled royal family. The Duke of Edinburgh's funeral service was drawing to a close, and soon they would have to face the world outside the protective walls of the chapel. For Harry and William, this transition would mark their first opportunity for private conversation in over a year. The recessional began with the same careful choreography that had marked the entire ceremony. The Queen, supported by her walking stick, moved slowly down the aisle, her dignity intact despite the visible toll of grief and advanced age. Behind her, other family members began to file out, maintaining the formal distance required by both protocol and pandemic restrictions. As the brothers emerged from the chapel into the afternoon sunlight, something unexpected happened. Catherine, William's wife, made a subtle but significant gesture. She stepped slightly back, creating space between herself and William as they walked toward the castle. It was a small movement, barely noticeable to casual observers, but it provided an opening for Harry to naturally fall in a step beside his brother. For the first time in over a year, the two princes found themselves walking side by side, without the buffer of Peter Phillips or the structure of formal ceremony. The cameras captured every moment as they moved across the castle grounds, their conversation inaudible, but their body language suggesting a tentative thaw in their relationship. William spoke first, his voice low and careful. The exact words exchanged would remain private, but witnesses later described seeing both brothers nod and respond to each other in what appeared to be genuine conversation rather than mere pleasantries. Catherine's diplomatic withdrawal had created the space for this moment, demonstrating her understanding of family dynamics and her desire to facilitate healing. Harry's response to his brother's overture was cautious, but engaged. The weight of their recent conflicts hung between them, but the shared experience of grief and the solemn atmosphere of the funeral provided a neutral ground for communication. They spoke as they walked, their pace slow and measured, neither rushing toward nor away from each other. The Queen, meanwhile, had retired to her private apartments, where she would spend the remainder of the day in quiet reflection. At 94, the physical and emotional demands of the funeral had been considerable, and her staff was concerned about her well-being during this difficult period. She had insisted on following every protocol of the funeral, but now she needed time to process her grief away from public scrutiny. Other family members dispersed throughout the castle, some gathering in small groups for informal conversations, others seeking solitude to deal with their emotions. The formal reception that might normally follow such an occasion had been canceled due to COVID restrictions, leaving everyone to find their own way of marking the end of the ceremony. Charles and Camilla made their way to a private sitting room where they could discuss the day's events and plan their return to their official residence. As the heir to the throne, Charles carried the additional burden of knowing that Philip's death marked another step toward his own eventual succession. The loss of his father was both personal and institutional, affecting not just the family, but the entire structure of the monarchy. Princess, and known for her straightforward manner and close relationship with her father, took time to speak with various family members, checking on their emotional state and ensuring that everyone was coping with the day's demands. Her practical approach to family matters had always been appreciated during difficult times, and this day was no exception. Back in the castle grounds, Harry and William continued their conversation as they walked. The presence of Catherine nearby provided both a witness to their interaction and a source of emotional support for William. Her relationship with Harry had always been cordial, and she had often served as a bridge between the brothers during previous family gatherings. The conversation between the brothers touched on immediate practical matters, their shared memories of their grandfather, and tentatively on the current state of their relationship. Neither was ready for a full reconciliation, but both seemed to recognize that their grandfather's funeral was not the appropriate venue for continuing their public feud. Security personnel and palace staff maintained a discreet distance, allowing the family members space for their private interactions while ensuring their safety and privacy. The media, restricted to designated areas outside the castle, could observe but not overhear the conversations taking place within the castle grounds. As the afternoon progressed, various family groupings formed and reformed. Cousins who rarely saw each other outside of official occasions took the opportunity to catch up, while older family members shared memories of Philip and discussed their concern for the Queen's well-being. The atmosphere was one of mutual support despite the underlying tensions that existed within the family. Harry's position during these informal gatherings was complex. As someone who had stepped back from official royal duties, he was both insider and outsider, family member and guest. His interactions with various relatives were watched carefully by other family members, each trying to gauge whether this visit might lead to a more permanent reconciliation. William's role was different, but equally challenging. As a senior working royal and future king, he had to balance his personal feelings about his brother's recent actions with his institutional responsibilities. Every conversation he had was potentially significant for the future of the monarchy, and he was acutely aware of this burden. The brothers' conversation gradually became more natural as they moved through different areas of the castle. Old habits and shared experiences began to surface, reminding them of their strong bond before recent events had driven them apart. They discussed their children, with Harry sharing news about his son Archie and his expectant wife Meghan. Catherine's presence continued to be helpful, as she could engage both brothers in conversation without taking sides in their disputes. Her diplomatic skills, honed through years of royal life, were evident as she helped maintain a comfortable atmosphere despite the underlying tensions. As the day wore on, it became clear that while this funeral had not produced a miraculous reconciliation, it had opened a door that had been firmly closed since Harry's departure from royal life. The shared experience of grief and the neutral ground provided by their grandfather's funeral had allowed for a cautious first step toward healing their relationship. As the sun began to set over Windsor Castle, the royal family faced the reality that their time together was drawing to a close. The funeral had provided a temporary truce, a neutral space where personal grievances could be set aside in favor of honoring their grandfather's memory. But now, as the formal obligations ended, everyone had to consider what would happen next. Harry's return flight to California was scheduled for the following day, which meant this might be his last opportunity for meaningful conversation with his family for the foreseeable future. The weight of this reality was evident in the way various family members approached their final interactions with him. Some were warm and welcoming. Others maintained a polite but distant demeanor, reflecting the complex feelings his departure had created within the family. The Queen had requested a brief private meeting with Harry before his departure. Their conversation took place in her private sitting room, away from the eyes of staff and other family members. What passed between grandmother and grandson during this meeting would remain confidential, but sources close to the royal household later described it as emotional and honest. Her Majesty, despite her grief and exhaustion, took the time to express her continued love for Harry while also conveying her disappointment about recent events. She listened as he explained his perspective on the decisions that had led to his departure from royal life. The conversation was difficult but necessary, providing both of them with a clearer understanding of each other's positions. William and Harry found themselves together again in the evening, this time in a more relaxed setting away from the formal atmosphere of the funeral. Their conversation became more substantive as they discussed not just their grandfather's legacy, but also their own relationship and the possibility of finding a way forward despite their differences. The brothers acknowledged that their dispute had been painful for their entire family, particularly during such a difficult time. They recognized that their grandfather would have been deeply saddened by their estrangement and would have wanted them to find a way to reconcile their differences. However, they also admitted that the issues between them were complex and would not be easily resolved. Catherine's role in facilitating these conversations could not be overstated. Her ability to maintain relationships with both brothers while supporting her husband through this difficult period demonstrated her maturity and diplomatic skills. She understood that any reconciliation between Harry and William would benefit not just them, but their children and the entire royal family. The practical implications of Harry's changed status within the family were evident throughout his visit. Security arrangements, accommodation, and even his participation in family discussions all reflected his new position as a non-working royal. These changes served as constant reminders of the consequences of his decisions and the institutional nature of royal life. Charles spent considerable time with both of his sons during this period, trying to understand their perspectives and explore possibilities for healing the family rift. As a father, He was heartbroken by the breakdown in his son's relationship. As the future king, he was concerned about the impact their feud was having on a monarchy's reputation and stability. The media attention surrounding Harry's visit was intense, but respectful, given the circumstances. News outlets around the world reported on every visible interaction between the brothers, analyzing body language and speculating about the future of their relationship. However, most coverage emphasized the appropriate focus on mourning the Duke of Edinburgh rather than exploiting family drama. Palace staff, who had worked with both brothers for years, were hopeful that the funeral might mark a turning point in their relationship. Many had witnessed the close bond between Harry and William during their younger years and were saddened by their current estrangement. The sight of them talking civilly gave staff hope that reconciliation might be possible. The conversation between the brothers touched on many sensitive topics, including Harry's allegations about racism within the royal family, his concerns about media coverage of his wife, and his frustrations with the constraints of royal life. William listened to his brother's perspective while also sharing his own feelings about Harry's public criticisms of the family. Both brothers acknowledged that their dispute had been conducted too much in public, causing pain not just to themselves, but to other family members, particularly the Queen during the final years of her husband's life. They expressed regret about the timing of their conflicts and the impact on their grandfather, who had always valued family unity above personal disagreements. As Harry prepared for his departure, the question remained whether this brief period of communication would lead to lasting change in their relationship. The issues that had driven them apart were substantial and involved not just personal grievances, but fundamental disagreements about duty, privacy, and the role of the monarchy in modern society. The funeral had demonstrated that beneath their public disputes, Harry and William still shared a deep love for their family and respect for their grandfather's memory. Whether these shared values would prove strong enough to overcome their differences remained to be seen. The path to reconciliation would be long and difficult, requiring compromise and understanding from both brothers. Catherine's influence on the eventual outcome could not be underestimated. Her relationship with Harry had always been positive, and her position as William's wife gave her unique insight into both brothers' perspectives. If anyone could help facilitate ongoing communication between them, it would likely be her. The legacy of Philip's funeral would be complex, remembered both for the dignity with which the royal family honored his memory and for providing the first opportunity for Harry and William to begin addressing their estrangement. While a full reconciliation remained uncertain, the funeral had at least opened the door to future dialogue. As Harry departed Windsor Castle for what might be his final visit for the foreseeable future, both brothers understood that their grandfather's death had closed one chapter of their family's history. Whether it would also mark the beginning of a new chapter in their own relationship would depend on their ability to build on the tentative progress made during this difficult but important day. The Queen, reflecting on the day's events from her private apartments, could take some comfort in knowing that her husband's funeral had been conducted with the dignity and respect he deserved. Whether it had also planted the seeds for healing within her family would only become clear with time. For now, she faced the future without her constant companion, supported by a family that, despite its current divisions, remained united in their love for her and their commitment to the institution she represented.